Hi, friends. Thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Concussion Coach podcast. I am excited for this conversation today. I get to chat with a fellow occupational therapist who has a passion for helping people who are struggling with post-concussion syndrome as well. And she has come up with a unique way of doing that. Shelley is an occupational therapist with over a decade of experience in treating individuals with traumatic brain injuries. She has had extensive training in concussion management and cognitive rehabilitation. Having endured persistent concussion symptoms herself, Shelley has unique insight into the complex and unique challenges that concussion symptoms bring into daily life. Her journey has led her to the forefront of enhancing occupational therapy with technology. She co-founded Brainbot, a digital rehab companion that leverages data and artificial intelligence to empower clients to understand and manage their concussion symptoms more effectively. Shelley's blend of clinical expertise, personal insight, and passion for innovative technology makes her a distinctive voice in the intersection of AI and occupational therapy. So thank you so much for being here, Shelley. I'm so excited to get to chat with you today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yay. Excellent. Okay, well, let's start with us hearing more about you. Where are you from? What do you love?
Oh, yeah. So I was born in Montreal in Canada and grew up in a suburb of Toronto. But I like to say that I'm from Montreal because I went back there for school and spent some of my formative early adult years there. And then I've been in Toronto for the last, 10, 15 years.
Awesome. Excellent.
Yeah. And in terms of what I love ideas and I love creativity and creating things. So like whether it's art or furniture, really bad furniture, not anything I would sit on, or gardening. And my husband and I joke because we met on a dating site, and on my profile, I wrote that I'm an idea junkie. So I think it holds true with kind of where I've gone in my life.
I love it. That's awesome. Wait, and so do you make furniture?
So I've done a few woodworking classes, and I have made a frame. I've made a CD rack, like way back in the day when we used to use CDs. I've made a spice rack, and I tried to make a recycling container to just hold all of the recycling bins. But then my class ended. It was too big of a project for me to actually finish. And now the wood pieces are doing a number of random things in my house.
I love it. That's awesome. I know how that goes. Well, not with furniture specifically, but just in general. I understand. So what got you interested in occupational therapy? And then how did you end up focusing in on helping people with traumatic brain injuries?
Yeah, so I kind of fell into OT. I always wanted to, I always wanted to go into healthcare. I was thinking about medicine for most of my childhood, as most kids, I think, do, because we don't really know about the rehab professions at that age. Mm-hmm. And I then realized I had to write the MCAT, which I was not that excited about. And I took off some time after university in Montreal to just work in a hospital, get a sense of what it felt like to see if I really wanted that lifestyle. I also worked in a physiotherapy clinic throughout university to also see maybe that was another route that I could take. And as I was studying for the MCAT, I realized more and more how little I enjoyed that experience. And if this was the first hurdle that I have to face to get into med school, I didn't know that I wanted to continue down that road. Mm-hmm. So I was looking for some backup options and kind of stumbled upon occupational therapy just through internet searches. And as I read about it, I was like, oh, this kind of sounds like me. This sounds really interesting. Let me try it. So as I was studying for the MCAT, I decided to apply to OT school, and then I would get if I got into OT school, I would start it and then see if I liked it. And then if I didn't, I would go back to the medical school route, and see what happened. And then as soon as I started OT school, it was like a aha moment. This is what I meant to do. And the rest is history.
I love it. That's so awesome. Yeah, that's kind of, I also looked into medicine and other things like a doctor. And I just like with how I wanted it to fit into my life, the therapy thing sounded like a better fit. And I just really, the more I learned about occupational therapy, the more I was like, yes, this is perfect for me. So I love it. I can relate to that experience as well. So, and then how did you focus on people with traumatic brain injuries? What was your OT journey?
So I feel like the theme of my life is I just kind of stumbled upon things or get thrown into things, and then things happen from there. So I was introduced to someone who gave me my first job a few months out of school. She was an owner of a clinic in the auto industry in Ontario. So working for personal injury lawyers with patients who were in motor vehicle accidents. And just by nature of motor vehicle accidents, it tends to come with a lot of mild traumatic brain injuries. And so my caseload started to become more and more mild traumatic brain injuries. And I got really interested in the different types of interventions you could offer and the fact that you can really see a lot of progress with those patients. And I really enjoyed working with them from like one of the worst moments in their life and seeing them really make true progress. And so, I guess that's kind of how it happened.
I love it. Yeah, that's awesome. And it can make a huge difference. The therapy for people dealing with concussions is a big deal.
That I think brain injuries are so unique. Everybody's living situation, their lifestyle, their social situation is unique. And then if you layer a brain injury on top of that, that is also so unique from all other brain injuries. It really keeps just from a work standpoint, it keeps things very fresh. It keeps things very interesting. And you have to be really creative to be able to facilitate that progress.
Yeah. So excellent points. I love that. Yes. So tell us about your injury. How long ago was it and what happened?
Yeah, so it happened during COVID, which was great. And I was rushing with my then 18-month-old to go meet a friend at the park. And I was just like rushing to get everything done. You know how it is rushing with these small children. And I parked at the park. I was taking my daughter out of the car seat into her stroller and bent down. And then as I turned around to like close the door of the car, my head just hit the side of it in just a weird, twisty way with a lot of force because I was rushing so much. And I knew right away, like something just felt completely off. And I tried to push through it a little bit, tried to meet up with my friend. And I got tunnel vision. Things looked really foggy. It was quite clear right away that it was a concussion.
Had you had prior concussions?
Not that I am aware of. Like I remember getting kicked in or hit in the head with a soccer ball when I was a kid, but people didn't really talk about concussions then. So I don't know. But this was my first experience. Okay.
And you had already been working with people who had these. So like, were you aware? It sounds like you were probably aware then pretty quickly that that's what you were doing.
Aware very quickly. And I'd say it's a blessing and a curse to be a concussion clinician and then get your own concussion because you know too much.
Yes.
And my family doctor knew what I did for a living. And so when I called her to tell her I thought I had a concussion, she was like, well, you know what's best. So do what you think is right.
What do you think you should do?
Perfect.
Oh, man. Okay. So I guess having had significant experience and knowledge about concussions, what about your experience of concussion, like your personal lived experience surprised you based on like what you already knew versus the real deal?
Yeah, so my kind of foundational treatment as an OT working with people with concussion was always starting with activity pacing. After the first 48 hours then at that point, it was still rest, not the relative rest that we know now from the consensus, but it was still rest. And after those 48 hours, you go back to activity as tolerated, but you need that activity pacing to really help figure out what is the right balance between rest and activity. So I'd say a couple of things surprised me. Number one, because I wasn't a worker, I wasn't in a car, I'm not an athlete when I got my concussion, accessing care was really challenging.
Oh, interesting.
And because my family doctor told me, do what you think is right, and didn't give me any direction, I found myself having to advocate for my own services, which I knew how to do. But when you're concussed and you're not thinking straight, it's very difficult to know how to do that. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to go to my network of colleagues who work in the same field to ask them for support. But once I knew what I needed by talking to them, because again, I could not think clearly, I then realized how expensive treatment was and how I really had to pick and choose the treatments that I got in a specific order so that I wouldn't spend all of my money on treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really challenging. So I had to sequence them in a specific way to see if one would help first. And if that didn't help, then I would go on to the next one. The other thing was, I knew I needed an OT, but I decided that I would be my own OT because I couldn't afford one. And it occurred to me in that kind of throughout that experience that I think that's the way a lot of people respond, because that last mile of care of getting back to normal activities is kind of like a last priority because you have all of these symptoms. And so it became very clear to me that that's often why, or likely why, OTs are maybe not seeing those concussion patients at the same volume that other providers are. However, and that being said, how it also occurred to me how important it is to get that OT care, because I was getting the treatment. I was doing well with the therapy. I had physiotherapy, I think, first. But what I really struggled with was that day-to-day function. So I really struggled with answering questions like, if I wake up and take my daughter to school and walk the dog and make breakfast, am I going to be in bed for the rest of the day, or will I be able to handle more? And no matter what I did in my physiotherapy, they weren't going to answer that question. They didn't know how to answer that question. And so going back to the activity pacing, I was trying to use the strategies that I would give to patients, and I realized they didn't work as a patient. And that was really surprising to me because they didn't answer those questions. What can I do next? What is going to bring on my symptoms again? What is going to leave me in bed, or what's going to be safe? And I have a very clear memory of going in the car with my parents. We were staying up in a cottage for a week because we were also doing basement renovations at the time to try to get some extra space during COVID. So my parents came to visit, and they took me for a drive to go on a hike. And I was getting nauseous in the car and getting a little bit dizzy in the car. And all I could think about is, am I going to pay for this later? Is this worth it? And again, the activity pacing strategies I would use as a clinician just wouldn't address these problems. So that was the most surprising thing to me.
That's super, super interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And you brought up some really good points of things that people deal with all the time. So yeah, I have a few questions based on what you were just talking about. So what do you think that the doctor, in an ideal world, what do you wish the doctor would have suggested to you?
I would have liked a very clear plan of, this is what you should look out for. This is who you should this is the care you should seek out first.
Okay. And that leads to my next question, which was going to be about you talked about sequencing the treatment. So again, very real world issue. Like, you don't want to spend all of your money. Like, people talk about how expensive this is, especially if there isn't some kind of lawsuit that they're having help pay for things based on a car accident or whatever. So what would you recommend if you're people who are listening to this and they're like, I don't know what to do next. I don't know what sequence to look. And there's going to be different opinions out there about what is right. But from your experience and your perspective, what would you recommend ideal sequencing would be?
It depends. And this is where it gets so challenging, because it depends what your symptoms are. And so what I ended up doing, and this happened to be so serendipitous, I found somebody on Instagram, of all places, who happened to be in Toronto, who was a nurse practitioner and an osteopath and a functional neurologist, who seemed to have this very holistic view of concussion rehab, very similar to the way an OT would. And I reached out to her and I asked her flat out, I was like, look, I'm an OT. I work in concussions. I can't be my own quarterback. I need you to be my quarterback. Will you do that? And she said yes. And she's now a friend of mine. We're colleagues. Like, she just really took me through the entire process and was that person to answer the questions of, okay, this is what I think you need to do first, second, third. This is when you can go back to work. This is how you're going to get back to work. And really to provide not only that guidance, but just the emotional support of you are where you are supposed to be. You are doing all of the right things. So having that type of quarterback, whether it's your family doctor, whether it's an OT, whether it's this nurse practitioner, osteopath, functional neurologist, just having that one person who can look at the big picture and help you problem solve and put things together. And I think OT is really well suited to do that.
Agreed. I think that sounds like a perfect, like that would be ideal for people, but I feel like that is a hard thing to find sometimes. But it's helpful to know that. I think maybe people don't even know that that's what they should be looking for. So having that, I think alone would be a good starting point. Like find somebody who understands concussions, who can help you kind of manage all of the different kind of treatments and help you make those decisions about sequencing and things like that.
Yeah, because I think I would just add to that, because I don't think most people understand the multidisciplinary nature of concussion recovery and how important that is. It's not just one piece of, there's never just one piece of the puzzle if you're dealing with those persistent symptoms. And so you need somebody who understands that and who can direct that.
Yes. Amen. So good. Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. And I assume we're going to get into this more as we go, but I'm curious to hear maybe what some of the strategies for pacing were that you were recommending. And then, and you're wondering, am I going to pay for this later? That's the real question you have, like, and how that's changed. So is that something that you're like, we can definitely dive into that. I assume that's what we'll be diving into as we get more into Brainbot. Okay. All right. We'll come back to that then. In the meantime, let's hear a little bit more about this experience. Like, how did your life change following your concussion? And as you were going through that journey of like doing all the different treatments and things, I'd be curious to hear what you tried and what was helpful for you.
Yeah. So in terms of how my life changed, so I had to take 6 months off of work. I think it took about 8 months for all of my symptoms to resolve, but I was off work for 6. And I mean, just day to day, it was just a change in life roles. Like I was a lot more dependent on my husband to do things. He was so incredibly supportive, which was amazing. And just taking on a lot more of the cooking, the cleaning, the childcare. And I wasn't able to be as present with my daughter at that point, which was challenging. And I was very dependent. I needed to take a lot of rest. I needed to, it was challenging. And it was just a very sad time, I would say, because just a lot of frustration. I really got to experience that grief of what was and what I can't do or what I thought I couldn't do. And it's really easy to slip into that mentality.
Yes. I'm curious with the 6 months that you ended up taking off of work, did you know right away that you were going to need to take work off?
I pushed.
Okay. Yeah. That's typical. Right. And so when did you discover that you needed to take time off? And then how, did you take it in pieces? Like, okay, I'm going to take a month here and then I need to make it another month. And it ended up being 6 months? Or did you know, I just need to take an extended period? Like, how did that play out for you?
I actually don't remember fully. But what I do remember is, well, again, I'm fortunate I work from home and I make my own schedule. So I was able to kind of pace myself in those first few weeks. I would say probably took about 3 or 4 weeks before I realized, I really need to take some time off because I'm not getting better. And then it was a full, I cut myself off. And then I think it was maybe 3 months or so that I cut myself off and then slowly started taking a little bit of work back and maybe started part-time around the 3-month mark, I would say, work my way back up to full-time.
Okay. Well, that's good to know that that's a possibility of how to go about something like that. And your daughter was young. You can totally let me know if you don't want to answer this question, but did you only have one kiddo now? I know you have 2 now. So did you?
Yeah, I only had 1 kid at the time and she was 18 months.
She was 18 months old. Okay. And did you feel like you were fully recovered by the time you had your second one?
And that was actually another piece that was that had changed because we were planning to have our second earlier and decided to wait because I just wasn't feeling well enough.
Yeah, because I think that's a huge piece that we don't talk about a lot is the family planning and whether how it will impact you as a woman having a baby, with all the hormone changes, all the things that's those are serious considerations. And
I didn't feel capable of caring for another child in that state. I didn't have the energy. I wasn't in the right mindset for it. I didn't have what it takes to take that plunge again.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And I think also hopeful, I hope, for people who are hearing this, that you did get to a point where you did feel like that was going to be possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Okay. So yeah, tell us a little bit about the treatments and the therapies that you tried and what was helpful for you.
So I started with a vestibular physiotherapist because I was quite dizzy and I knew I had some vision issues. And that was pretty good. She got me to a certain point. Again, it was all virtual because it was COVID. And so I felt like I could only get so far. And that's where after that, I sought out this osteopath who was absolutely phenomenal. And we went through, I think, a series of treatment. And then she went a little bit more in the background where I would just kind of call her as needed and go in for treatments here and there. My father-in-law is a chiropractor, so he would just treat me kind of as needed, which was very helpful. And then I went to another vestibular physiotherapist who also did like neck therapy and things like that. And so I did that a few times throughout the 8 months. And I'd say kind of the third bout of vestibular therapy was incredibly helpful, where I really focused on vision exercises, because that was kind of the final piece needed for my recovery. I did a neurooptometry assessment, but by the time I had gone through the vision therapy, things were in a good enough place that I didn't need formal vision therapy treatment. Just looking at my list here, I think that was the bulk of it. I did have a neurologist on my team, and so he did prescribe a number of headache medications. And then after my symptoms resolved, I ended up having, whether it's related to the concussion, I have a feeling it was, I had a quite acute anxiety episode and then went to a neuropsychiatrist to help with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Those are a lot of things and helpful to hear what was good, what was helpful. Did you feel like, well, you mentioned before, this wasn't covered by insurance necessarily, or what suggestions do you have for people who are looking at trying all these different things and figuring out how to pay for it? Any advice?
Oof, that is a good question. I would say address the symptom that is bothering you the most. So find a provider who can treat the symptom that's bothering you the most.
Okay, that's good to know. And as an OT, I feel like depending on the setting that you work in and what kind of training you've had, vision is definitely within the realm of OT, but a lot of us don't have necessarily specific training in it unless it's part of our daily work. So was the vision piece something that you had a lot of familiarity with, or do you work on that vision stuff with patients now? I'd be interested in hearing. Yeah,
so that's really interesting because this is where I've seen there's a really big difference in scope of practice between Canadian OTs and American OTs.
Oh, okay.
And so Canadian OTs certainly do some vision therapy and does require training. That's not training I've had yet. That's certainly training that I would love to have in the future. But typically we leave the vision therapy to neurooptometrists. And so we tend to refer out to something like that.
Okay. Super interesting. Yeah. I feel like, from my experience, that's kind of similar. There are some exercises and things that we do, but if it's a bigger problem, then we usually just send them to a vision therapist. So, okay, good to know. So tell me a little bit about, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself in the early days of your injury?
I would get psychotherapy earlier.
Okay. How early? Right away?
I would say, if you want me to talk about clinical recommendations, if your symptoms aren't getting better within a few weeks, I'd say 2 weeks, then you want to look at multidisciplinary care if, finances are not an issue. What I found, and especially because I'm susceptible to kind of anxiety, as, this is something I've had my entire life and just got worse after my concussion, what was very clear to me is the interplay. And this is, I knew this as a clinician, but I didn't really know it until I experienced it. The significant interplay between your mental health, your mental state, and the state of your nervous system and its impact on your symptoms. That was so incredibly clear to me as I was going through my recovery. And so if I could have addressed the mental health piece, I wonder whether my recovery would have been faster.
Thank you so much for saying that. I feel like it really does seem like as I've learned more and my understanding of the nervous system piece has come in relatively recently in my, compared to my experience of working with people with concussions. And I feel like it's foundational. It's what I start with now. We need it is foundational to recovery, the nervous system, emotional, mental piece. is huge and really does impact the other symptoms, the physical symptoms that happen. So I appreciate you saying that. And yeah, I do think that is so, so important. So thank you for bringing that up. And I'm curious, I love having people share on the podcast here things that have been helpful for them in their, and especially as an OT with this, you have such a unique perspective. So things that you've seen, and again, we'll get into the more of the pacing specifically later, but any other like tips, tricks, things that you really love to share with patients or that were really helpful for you in dealing with the anxiety or some of the other symptoms that you see a lot of people having?
So just to speak about anxiety for a moment. So I've had an anxiety my whole life that's kind of come and gone. And I've always felt that my anxiety was manageable enough that I didn't really need to treat it outside of, having counseling here and there kind of as things came up in my life. And after this experience, I had this one acute anxiety episode that was like quite scary. And it was much more intense than I had ever experienced, that caused me to go and see a psychiatrist and actually get medicated for anxiety. And I would say that is one of the best things that I've ever done, because it made me realize that while I did manage my anxiety my whole life, I didn't have to suffer through some of the things as much as I did. And it has really made life a little bit more even, a lot more, I wouldn't say enjoyable, because I enjoyed life before, but just it's made things a lot easier. And so I'm a big proponent of medication for mental health or for, anxiety disorders and other things and that is really to get you to a point where you can really be open to therapy and you can really get the most out of your therapy. And medication's not for everybody, and I understand that, but for me, it was like truly pivotal.
Okay, that's really good to know. I appreciate you bringing that up, because I do feel like I get asked that a lot, like how much is medication helpful or not, and is it good for, especially after concussion, like all of these things. So that's a helpful perspective. Thank you for sharing that. Any other things that you like to share with patients or that you find particularly helpful as far as, helping with de-stimming if they're feeling overwhelmed, or other tips and tricks?
Yeah. So my osteopath, I'm always going to go back to her because she has so many tricks. Her name is Melissa Biscardi, by the way. And she has her clinic is called the Rehab Lab, and she has lots of great videos on YouTube, because there were a lot of self-massage techniques that she showed me that were just so helpful for relief, especially with I was reminded of all of these when my daughter pushed a door in my head the other week, because my nervous system was so activated. Like your nervous system really holds on to this trauma. So anytime I hit my head, I convinced myself that I have a concussion just from the anxiety of it. So I was practicing a lot of these techniques. So things like massaging your eyebrows, for example, like just from the middle of your eyebrow all the way to the end. She showed me this one technique called neck milking, where you essentially grab your neck on either side, close to your ears, where your vagus nerve is, and you're massaging your vagus nerve to stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system. So there are a couple of these self-massage techniques that I found really helpful, and it just gives you a sense of control. It gives you a tool to try to regulate your nervous system to help symptoms get relieved. There's another scalp massage, just as if you're washing your hair, to massage your scalp that way. She sent my husband some videos to massage my head as well. So I'd say just those self-care pieces are really important. And also just removing yourself kind of as needed for small breaks. You don't want to remove yourself from activity completely, but if you're just getting overstimulated, to just go into a quiet place for a few minutes, take a few deep breaths, and then come back into it.
Love it. Thank you. And we can link to the Rehab Lab in the show notes as well. That sounds like it would be something that'd be really helpful. Thank you for sharing those. Awesome. So my other question for you is about the support system. You mentioned, your husband was picking up a lot of the slack from what you weren't able to do when you were deep in it. What advice do you have to people or to give to people who are loving and supporting someone who's dealing with concussion?
So I would say get involved in their treatment and get involved in their recovery journey. It's really important for them to get educated about what concussion is and isn't, what concussion looks like, because some days you're going to feel okay and you're going to look normal and you're going to be able to do a lot. And then other days you really won't. And that can be quite confusing to a loved one who doesn't understand what the trajectory of recovery looks like. And it could I can see it causing a lot of resentment or tension between loved ones, because some days you are able to do things and pitch in and other days you can't. So just being part of that education journey, understanding what treatment looks like, and how to support your loved one, and then having that delicate balance of encouraging them to try new activities, to go a little bit longer, and then giving them the space to heal. I think I may have cocooned a little more than I needed to. And so had I maybe been encouraged to try things for a little bit longer, to do things even though I had a headache, just having that emotional support, that motivation is helpful.
Mm-hmm. Such a hard balance to find, right? That just right challenge that we talk about as OT.
Yeah.
It's like the pushing, but not too hard. Like, it can be so complicated. Yeah. But I was reminded this morning of just this concept of like giving someone the least amount of support of like, how do we say this? Like you want to help somebody, but just the minimum amount so that they are doing as much as they can on their own. And then maybe, yeah, like you said, to some degree being like, okay, let's do it a little bit, even though you've got this headache, or let's push a little bit. And then I love what you said about giving the space afterwards to heal from it. And like, let's figure out what we learned from this experience and let's go forward from there. So that's, I think, very valuable and probably something that the pacing and reviewing how things went will be helpful with that as well. So we'll get into that in a second too. But before we get into that, how are you doing today? Like, concussion wise, and what are you still dealing with? What keeps you going?
Yeah. So thank goodness it only lasted 8 months, and I actually feel very lucky that it only lasted 8 months, because I know for a lot of people it's much longer than that. And so from a symptom standpoint, everything resolved. But after that, that's when I had that acute anxiety episode, and I've been medicated for anxiety ever since. And then I was also diagnosed with ADHD after the fact, which was really interesting. Again, yeah, I don't know if that's connected or not. So those, I'd say, are probably the two things that I'm continuing to struggle with, but I'm medicated and I have lots of strategies, and I'm kind of working to learn how to best manage that, especially in a very busy and demanding lifestyle that I have taken on.
Yes. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. And any other lessons that you've learned through this experience, or anything else that you want to make sure that we touch on in relation to concussions?
I think that activity pacing is surprisingly one of the hardest things to do, and one of the most foundational and important things to do as part of concussion recovery.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Amen. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump into that. I want to kind of go back to what we'd started about with before, with like, what kind of pacing suggestions were you giving to people before that you were like, oh, I would have said to do this, but now I see that doesn't work. Like what doesn't work? And then what have you found that does work, and how have you incorporated that with Brainbot? Like, let's just jump into this stuff.
Absolutely. So what I used to do with patients was have them do an activity diary. And I would have them write down all of the activities that they did in a day. I would sometimes use a point system where you would give people a certain number of points per activity. And so you could kind of count how many points they have at the end of the day and see where they're overexerting themselves and where they might not be exerting themselves enough. And so I would have some patients who were type A, and they would write down everything they did in a week. And then we would follow up the next time we saw each other, and I would have a binder of information to go through with them in a session. And then I'm spending all of my time in that session going through the activity diary and not really spending time on treatment. If we didn't use the activity diary, then we would use maybe the green light system. There are lots of different analogies we would use to talk about pacing, or we would just talk about, take rests when you need, or slow down a little bit, or add 5 minutes here, or take away 5 minutes there. So very kind of generic, loosey-goosey, take it easy, but not too easy type recommendations. Mm-hmm. So, when I was going through my recovery, I decided to do the activity diary, because that's the most tangible way to really understand what's going on in your day and what might be bringing on symptoms. But what I saw firsthand was, number one, there's no standardized way to track activities. And so some days I would log my sleep, some days I wouldn't, some days I'd log grocery shopping, some days I wouldn't, some days I'd log everything, other days I wouldn't. And there was nothing to analyze the data for me. So even if I had a full activity diary and a full symptom diary, I then had to go through it to put the pieces together and to connect the dots. And even that didn't tell me why I felt like crap that day or had that rough headache or how to prevent that. And what I was so desperate to know is, how do I stop this headache from happening again?
Yes.
So yeah, it was really, I think what was missing, those tools are useful, and I've definitely seen success with them with clients, but that analysis piece was missing. And that's what I really wanted, to feel like I had some control of my recovery.
Okay. So how did that lead into what you're doing now? Or tell me how Brainbot came about and what it is and what it does and all the things.
Yes. So what Brainbot is, I guess, do you want me to talk about how it came about?
Yeah.
So Brainbot actually started before I got my concussion, surprisingly. And because of the gaps that I was seeing as a clinician, because this analysis piece was so challenging as a clinician, just by getting a lot of information or not enough information from clients. Because on the other end of the spectrum, you'll get the clients who don't track, who don't do the homework, either because they forget their diaries, they don't know where it went, they don't want to do it, whatever it is. And so on either end of the spectrum, you're just having a really hard time figuring out where to go with your treatment plan. So we thought about this, using an app to be able to collect this data in a much more seamless way, designed it in a certain way, but then going through my concussion recovery, completely redesigned the way that it was going to be provided to people. And so we have built our first version of Brainbot, which is a mobile app that helps patients learn how to track their activities. We use a Weight Watcher style point system, where you're given a certain number of points to spend every day. Every activity you do costs a certain number of points, depending on how much energy it exerts. And so as you do your activities throughout the day, you can actually see in real time your points diminishing, so that you know how much space you have in your day to do the rest of your activities. Or if you go over your points, which certainly happens, to maybe take it a little bit easier the following day, and you can see visually how your symptoms change throughout the day. Now, what we also do is we have AI generated strategies. And so based on all of the activities that you're logging, we can give you strategies that are actionable and specific to your situation that you can then apply to make things easier. So for example, we can see that you were grocery shopping on the weekend for 3 hours and you felt horrible after it. So we would give you a strategy to say, why don't you try going during the week, during non-peak hours? Try staying there for an hour instead of 3. And we know that you have noise sensitivity. So why don't you try these noise canceling headphones while you're in the grocery store? So what it does is help patients learn how to still do the activity, but maybe not get so triggered or bring up their symptoms as much.
It's so cool. So sorry, I know you have more to say.
That's okay.
Question though, how do you assign the points to the activities? Because is it kind of a general, like a shower takes this much out of persons and people in general, so this is how many points it is, and going grocery shopping is generally this? Or does it somehow get tailored to the person? If they do they put in how much they think that it impacts them?
So all of the points are predetermined. And the reason we did that was because we learned both clinically and through our research talking to users that it takes so much work to figure out how many points every activity costs. So we just thought it would be a lot easier to determine that. So we've used the metabolic equivalent of tasks to determine kind of the baseline score. And we've normalized that to be on kind of a 10-point scale. And we've also modified them to include the environmental demands, the cognitive demands, the emotional demands of that activity. If users find that the points that we've allocated doesn't really match because certain activities are harder than others depending on the person, they can actually create their own activity and assign their own point if they want.
Oh, cool. Very, very cool. So when you say when you're talking about creating this, was this like your idea, or how did it come about as far as like who you're working with and where you're getting the resources to do this? Like, how did this come about?
Yeah, so this was my idea and something I'd been thinking about for a long time. And when I was on maternity leave, we get a year in Canada for maternity leave. So
amazing.
So by the 6-month mark, I was getting a little bit antsy, and I found this incredible co-working space that had a daycare in the basement. So I brought my daughter to the to the daycare in the basement, and then I would work upstairs and just start brainstorming what this would look like. And I was so lucky that my husband's friend from high school was in product design and product management. And so I would just text him occasionally to ask him some questions. And he ended up getting very involved in Brainbot and became one of our advisors. And he actually built all of the screens in our pilot version. So he really helped me learn how to develop an app, and it introduced us to the contractors we used to build it. And since then, we have developed a team. We now have myself, my husband's our CEO right now, and we have advisors in technology, in artificial intelligence, in product. We have 3 full-time engineers. We have a data science advisor. Like we've got a pretty fantastic team.
That's so cool. That is so cool. I love it. And sounds like it's really I feel like there's a lot of good that this can do. And so are you guys, where are you at in the production process? Like, is this out and available all over? Like how available is it?
We just finished a program at the Techstars Healthcare Accelerator in Los Angeles. We were there for 3 months, and it was an incredible program where we learned a lot about the healthcare system in the US, which is very different from Canada, and how to go about getting a technology like this into people's hands, how to help OTs kind of provide this type of service. And we learned quite a bit from that program and what was needed in the US market.
Okay.
So as part of our participation in the Techstars Healthcare Accelerator, we have decided to launch a digital return to activity clinic, which means that we are providing the app, but really we're going to be leveraging AI and telehealth to unlock better, more affordable, and more accessible OT care. Because from my experience, I saw that OT care is really not accessible and it's not affordable, and tends to be one of the last priorities for a lot of people. But as I have experienced also, having that quarterback or having that person to really help you through the day-to-day is so critical that we want to be able to make that easier. So if we are able to provide this innovative care model that is much more affordable for patients, they'll be able to do a lot better in the recovery and get back to everything they want to much faster. So
is this something you see people ordering, like someone who has a concussion getting it and just using it on their own? Or is it something that it's going to be healthcare providers, OTs, like helping with it and like providing it for their patients, or both? Like what do you see it?
Yeah. So with this digital return to activity clinic, we want to supercharge OT practice. And so we would be doing all of the administrative work for the OTs by getting referrals, by taking care of all of the admin and the billing, and having the AI help with the charting and with the assessments and all of that piece, so that the OT can very efficiently do the OT care with the client. And so they're able to push their treatment plan to the client through the app. The patient can see on their app everything that they have to do in that day. And the OT is also getting that real-time data analytics to understand what's happening outside of care. And so there's just a lot more transparency as to what's happening on the ground with the client without the client having to pay for so many sessions of OT. So just looking at a very different, innovative service model.
Cool. So if someone listening today doesn't have an OT that they're working with, is this something that they would have access to, or would you say find an OT and tell them about this program? What would you?
So you would just sign up for Brainbot, and we would assign OTs.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. So we really just want to make that type of care accessible. We want to help people get back to activities.
Yes, please do that. Yeah, it is so important. That whole doing what you care about thing is a big deal. Like getting back to life.
Yeah. And so this OT service piece, we are launching later in the summer, and we're launching in Canada to start. But in the States, we're looking for the OTs out there, we are looking for people to partner with us to work with them to really develop a platform that works for providers and for patients in Canada. For whoever's listening, that will be launched this summer. And so we're going to be sending out all kinds of information when that's ready.
Fabulous. Okay. And we're in 2024. People are listening to this way later, but it's summer 2024. So after that, it's available. So very, very cool. So what impacts have you seen so far of using this app for people? Like what are people saying? What feedback have you gotten? And how, like, did you use it yourself? How has it been for you?
Yeah, so it's been a really interesting experience. Our users have been so there's a level of control that people feel they have gained after using the app because they have a much better sense of what activities are actually bringing on symptoms that they would have never thought before. Because we have a drop-down menu of all kinds of different activities, they're almost prompted to log activities that they wouldn't have thought about. So for example, I had one user tell me, I didn't realize how much washing dishes took out of me. And so they're now including those types of activities in their list as one of the things that they should watch out for. Whereas before they would have completely they wouldn't even thought twice about doing that and just gone about their day and had their headache and not realized why. And so it gives a lot more transparency to what they're doing and how they're feeling and why. It also gives them the tools to have conversations with their family members, with their loved ones, to let them know what they're able to do, what they're not able to do. I've been told that it has helped them set boundaries for themselves. I had one user tell me that she now has a calendar shared with her entire family. She has grown-up children, and the grown-up children have access to this calendar so that they know when they can schedule things with her and when they can't, because she can only do X number of things per day. And so it really gives people tools, and very actionable tools, to just make the day go much smoother.
That's awesome. And I love that. And do you feel like it helps? I imagine this is the whole point in doing this, is that when you get more aware of it and you're able to manage it, it's not only let's manage how we are right now, but by managing that, you increase your ability to have the rest that you need so that you can actually make progress and improve and increase your capacity. Have you seen that play out?
Well, yeah, and actually Brainbot is designed that way. And so the point that you get each week actually changes based on how you're doing. And so as you are able to do more, you have the capacity to do more, you get more points. And so you can work your way up and get the guidance of how to work your way up in a very gradual way.
And that's probably really validating, rewarding for people to see, like, oh, look, I'm getting more points per day because I'm able to handle this more. And having some kind of solid evidence that progress is happening can be really therapeutic in and of itself, I imagine.
Exactly. Yeah. And the way that we visualize analytics gives you a really good way to track that progress too. And so we color code things based on how you're feeling. And so I've had users tell me that it's really helpful to see that they've had, for the first time in who knows how long, they've had a couple of green days in the week, and green is good. Or their goal is to get all yellow days because they've only had red days. And so it really gives a very tangible way to set goals, to see how you're doing. And then you get really excited when you're like, oh my God, I had a green day today. And to see that progress moving forward.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. And I'm curious, because you did mention the analytics piece. That's something that you had wished that you'd had when you were dealing with it. Are there graphs or things that kind of a visual representation of all of this information that you're getting as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we tell you how many points you've been spending, how that makes you feel. We have a couple of metrics that we've created in terms of how your day is going and how your week is going. We highlight the top 3 worst symptoms that week. And then we give you a graph as well, and we rank all of the symptoms that you've logged that week from worst symptoms to best symptoms. So it gives you a really good sense of where you need to focus your treatment. And you can also share these with your provider. And so they know where to target their treatment as well in a very easy and fast way. We also highlight the worst activities you log that week and the best activities you log that week. And so that also gives you a sense of where you need to target your efforts to make things a little bit easier. And the best activities give you a good sense of, if you're not feeling well, maybe those are some things that you can try.
Oh, cool. I love this. And how frequently are people needing to log their symptoms and check in with the app?
So in terms of symptoms, we would just ask once a week to log your symptoms. And then for a full insight report, we would say about 4 days a week is the minimum to get really comprehensive insights. But we can also give you those AI-powered strategies, even if you log a couple of activities here and there. And so it really depends on what your goals are. If you tend to be a go-getter and you are doing more than you can handle and you really need to pull back, I'd say log everything and see what's bringing on your symptoms. But if you just have a couple of goals in mind and you know more or less what's bringing on your symptoms, but you want to track them a little bit more specifically, then you just log a couple of those, you just log those specific activities. And so it really depends on what your goal is.
Cool. Very cool. I know that you have some personal experience with this more recently, because like you said, you got, if you don't mind sharing, we can totally take that out if you don't want to, but
okay.
your daughter so kindly accidentally hit your head with the door recently, and that scared you, and you said that you did use the app for a few days to kind of like think, like, how was that experience for you?
Really cool. I was really thrilled to see how helpful it was. So I was a little bit more diligent about, I wouldn't say diligent, I'd say I was very aware of what my symptoms were, but I didn't want to cocoon. I was very cognizant about that and thinking, okay, whether this is a concussion or not a concussion, I'm going to go about my day. I'm just going to monitor myself. So I monitored myself in the app. I logged an activity. And when you log an activity, you also log how you feel based on an emoji. And so as you're logging throughout the day, you see the list with the emojis start to populate. And so I could see as my emojis were getting a little bit worse. And just the visual of seeing, okay, I feel a little bit worse, it was a really good trigger, a cue for me to take a break. And I actually posted a little bit on Instagram too, because I just to show the visual, if anybody's interested, I can send you that link. Yeah. I had a conference actually the next day and decided to go. And so I went through my morning routine. My kids got to school. We drove to the conference. And that's when I felt red and I logged a red emoji. I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to sit in my car for 10 minutes and do a meditation. And I did that. I logged the meditation and I actually felt better. So that was another cue for me. Okay, I can go into the conference now. And then I set my timer every hour. I would just go back to Brainbot, log my symptom, see how it felt. And as soon as I would get red, I'd go out, do a meditation, do something to just manage my headache, and then go back in. So for it, just the visual was such a good cue to take care of myself.
I love this. And it's super interesting because as you're talking about that, I'm like, it seems like we should remember how we are feeling and we should know if we're not feeling good. Like that seems like it should be something, but I think in general, people are not good at that. And especially people who are dealing with a concussion or, like a brain injury, like it takes away some of that self-awareness. And so I can see the value of that. Like, and even just to be able to look, okay, 20 minutes ago, 2 hours ago, that is, I had it logged. That's how I was feeling. That emoji right there represents how I was feeling. And now I see that it is a little bit lower. So maybe I do need to do something about that. I could definitely see the value in that.
And what was so helpful was I was at this conference the whole day and it was very intense. And when I logged at the end of the day, I saw that I had a couple of reds, but my symptoms were the same at the beginning of the day as they were at the end of the day. And that was a really good signal that like, I'm okay. Yeah. I can do it again tomorrow.
That's awesome. Oh, I love this. It's that's great. I appreciate you sharing your personal experience with it as well, because I think, yes, as unfortunate as it is that you've experienced this, it has also been it's a benefit to the rest of us. So thank you for that. So is there, I love asking this question, and I would be interested in hearing your thoughts just as you're looking back over this entire, your personal concussion journey, and as you've seen other people dealing with theirs, how have you maintained hope, or how have you seen people maintain hope that is inspiring to you?
Good question. How have I maintained hope? I would say just in my work, let's talk about others' hope. I've been so inspired by some of my clients and some of these users who have been through so much and have suffered through so many symptoms and so much pain and have the resilience to keep moving forward. And they don't give up in finding something that will help them because they truly just believe that something will help them. And I have come to believe that with the right care at the right time, with the right supports, things will get better. You just have to listen to your body. You have to challenge yourself. You have to just really lean into that resilience, lean into that strength inside to know that things will get better.
I thank you for sharing that. That comes up a lot. And I really do feel like that is so important, that hope, that belief that things can get better, and you are proof of it and you've experienced it, you've seen it, but continuing to search until you find it is key to that. And so I guess I thank you for bringing that out, and I hope people listening can feel that. I know it can be dark sometimes, so I hope that in those dark times you can hold on one more day and do that resilience thing, and at some point find the courage to keep looking, because healing is possible.
I would just add to that, if your provider doesn't have anything left for you and just tells you that you are going to be like this forever, don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. Find a clinician who is skilled and who understands concussions and knows what you need.
And I get an amen. Yes. Amen to that. Thank you. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us, and for your passion and your going for it and making this Brainbot app. It sounds like it is awesome. I'm excited to see it and play with it. Tell me, how can people get in touch with you or get a hold of Brainbot to try it out? What's the best way to hear more from you?
Yeah, so you can get in touch with me on LinkedIn. You can get in touch with me on Instagram. For Instagram, we are at brainbot.app. Okay. So BRAINBOT.app. And you can follow me on LinkedIn, Shelley Vaisberg. And we have a Brainbot page as well.
How do you spell Vaisberg?
Vaisberg.
Okay, perfect. And what is your website?
www.brainbot.co.
All right. Excellent. So people can look those up and get more information and be in touch with you. Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing this, and for everything that you're doing. I think this is very valuable work for people who are dealing with this type of injury. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.